Hello, and welcome to a special session of Digital Futures Young focused on AR, VR, and GAVE environments. My name is Diana Bogosian, and along with Claudio Barsan-Pipo and Sinamo Safavi, we will be moderating this session focused on a topic that is quite important as part of our research and also ongoing conversations that we've had with our Digital Futures session. So we're very excited to have 7 groups taking this conversation further with us today. The process of selection of this group were through an open call, which was announced last month, and we had a number of applications, and through process of selection, we have arrived to a very interesting array of selections today, and we're hoping that each of these projects will bring in different aspect of what we're seeing as a very exciting landscape of opportunities, not only for field of architecture, but design in general. I would like to tell you a little bit about my background. I'm trained as an architect, and I'm also an interactive media designer focused on application of AR and VR technology for raising environmental awareness. I'm going to pass it on to my colleague, Claudio, if you could introduce yourself before we begin with our audience.
Sure, thank you, Diana, and welcome to all of the presenters. My name is Claudio Barsan-Pipo. I am also involved in this kind of field of AR and VR. I run my own company, Neomorph Studio, which focuses on exploring the, let's say, more applied and serious gaming aspects of the technology in the field of architecture, but also outside of this field. I'm also doing my PhD in Tongs University under the supervision of Professor Neil Leach, where I'm actually exploring the how we could actually use this kind of effective and or empathic, let's say, analysis of humans' emotions to see exactly how those can drive interesting new ways of creating spaces, basically. So my field of interest lays there. How can we use procedural generative environments, artificial intelligence, and brain computing interfacing to actually explore in VR, in AR, this kind of new opportunities, new affordances that this environment or this new media type actually allows for. Okay, so I think I'm going to pass now on to the next, let's say, co-host or co-moderator.
Thank you, Claudio. I'm Sinamo Safavi. I'm from TU Delft, joining today from Delft. I've done my PhD in hyperbody research group of TU Delft, and my main area of expertise and interest is computational design and robotic fabrication. I'm also teaching leading studios in the Southern Institute of Architecture, where I lead DARS unit. We are also looking into robotic fabrication and architectural robotics in general. And I'm also the founder of Sadafi Architecture Studio. And I see this panel as a very good, let's say, continuation of a panel that we had titled Immersive Robotic Environments. And I'm very much looking forward to see the presentations and the discussion to follow today. Thank you very much.
So as mentioned before, we have 7 very exciting presentations. The order today will consist of first 10-minute presentation per each, let's say, group. Some of them are individuals, some of them are larger groups. And then after each of these presentations, we will engage in a conversation based on the questions that we hope you'll be posting on YouTube, or let's say ask us on our social media or Discord, as well as questions that we as moderators have from our speakers. So we will begin by a presentation by Samim and Aryan. Please begin and also give us an introduction to yourself and your work, and we're really looking forward to seeing your presentation. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. I will start sharing my screen. So, hello everyone. My name is Samim, and I am the research associate and PhD candidate at Digital Design Unit at TU Darmstadt, Faculty of the Architecture.
And I'm Aryan. I do my master's in Haveka University of Applied Science in Hildesheim, focusing on interaction design and augmented reality systems.
So this is our faculty, the Faculty of the Architecture at the TU Darmstadt. And as I said, we are the digital design unit with the focus on the computational design techniques, the materiality, the gamification of the design process, the robotic fabrication, and design collaboration. So this is the moments that our lab is getting messy, but for me it's really interesting because this is exactly the moment that the digital flow to the materiality and the matter flows to the form. And what we're going to present today is our our recent researches and physical digital interwoven and the physical digital interwoven spaces. And what we are going to present is our exploration around the question of how can the materialized and the digital merge together through the advanced technologies and basically the augmented reality as the media in between, and how they can affect each other. And we have brought this question to the master design studio, what we call it, floating amusement. And this is exactly what can I explain it about it is, it's about an amusement park, a fictional scenario that can be experimental field and also a place for the experimental approaches to bring the users and observers in their interaction in some place between the unbuilt and built environments. But back to the background where we have got this question is actually where on the tectonics and digital fabrication method, rotoform, which is an ongoing research in our institute. And it's about to materializing the hollow objects. As you can see, we can add more and more and more materials inside one object and making a lightweight and individual building elements. And how we are doing it is by rotating them. We are putting the minimum amount of the material, and what we are getting out is nothing more different than the Eastern bunny chocolates. And by equipping the process with the robots, we can change the layers, we can change the inner cavity, and we can have control on how can we distribute the weights over some structure. As you can see, this installation demonstrates an unexpected balance in some structure that is not falling down. And this is because that we are changing the center of the mass. And as you see in the, if you're expecting an object as a solid, the center of mass would be in the middle, but adding the material in uneven way, and we can change the center of the mass, and therefore we can result and counter intuitive behavior and equilibrium. But what is more interesting is that when the objects are coming to the fiction, to the motion, and as you can see, these experiments and the work by the David Henry, the artist, is showing us that he's actively changing the center of the mass and bring everything to the motion, which is not different than all these tools and toys that we have had as a child. And what is also interesting for us is that this is something that we are dealing with that in a daily tasks of the construction sites to bring something from vertical to the horizontal, moving and so on. And then therefore we have asked, what if we considering these objects or elements or whatever we call them as architectural characters, and the architectural characters that they can float, they can dive, they can rebirth, they can rotate and playfully interact with the users. And what is also interesting about these studies that geometry is also playing an interesting role. For instance, the early works of the mathematician Paul Schatz from Switzerland is showing us, who has founded the Oloid geometry, that there's a certain relations between the geometry, the pattern, the motion, and then the question is that how can we bring them to the design? And these mathematical relations and the physical relations and properties has been studied in our design studio and helped us to bring and emerging the new entities who they can also walk and they can rotate and following some certain behavior. These studies had also challenged the gravity, or the gravity had challenged them, and with the verticality, and all of a sudden there's a place for integrating so many different physical rules, which are, we know them from the physical world, but not the digital world, and bring them inside. But what is also more interesting is that we can, through the AR, we can expanding the way that we are presenting and expanding our way of the presentation. What is interesting is that these choreographical motions are not something new in our field. They have been existing since 400 or maybe also before this reference, and showing us that there are some undrawn drawings that have been conducted for the certain motions and to bring the objects or characters from one side to the other side. But about the representation, what is more interesting, and in the context of the augmented reality, is that these drawings had changed to the computer renderings, like as you see here, and then after generations after, the computer renderings are trying to getting more realistic and showing more of the texture, the light, the simulation of the environment, and so on. And we have asked, what if that we can augmenting these presentations also with the physical behavior of some characters. And this is the interesting moment for me, because then this interaction with the models in the augmentation of the data to the city and to the environment can bring up the new doors to the research and the way that we are implementing these tools to our designs. So in the next steps, I can introduce the different projects, for instance, this project on the voxelization, and also actively changing the center of the mass by putting the human, and all of a sudden these characters with this, our students named them capsules, jellyfishes, and so on, and had combined together, detached and attached for assemblies, and to shaping the environment, but also in the playful moments. For instance, these videos that showing the physical simulation, they're not the animations, and they are becoming in the interaction between the users, the observers, and so on. Or for instance, the sequence of these motions or this interaction between them has been planned to be done by the human, as you see, but due to the augmented reality tools, they can be conducted in another way, which is challenging also our representation or action tools.
Yeah, for making the complex simulation tasks, we decided to go for Unity and NVIDIA physics as a very powerful tool to demonstrate that, which we could simulate fluids or change the center of mass rapidly, and so on and so forth. So what we basically did was to make a bridge, a connection bridge between Rhino Grasshopper as a common CAD program and Unity, so we could have the data in real time in both platforms. Next slide, please. Yeah, and this also enabled us to make individual interaction modes for each family of characters, such as shifting the center of the mass, as you can see on the left, or switching between them, or even pushing and rolling the geometries, the characters. So, and what happened was that with augmenting this data as a mobile augmented reality system, the participants could simulate and visualize, represent the characters in each place, independent from the user's location. But the most interesting part was, as we wanted to make a permanent exhibition at the Main River in Frankfurt. So what we did was that to use GPS coordination for each installation, so we could anchor them in the city, and this time not dependent to the user's location.
So I would, as a conclusion, maybe the most interesting thing for us is exactly what Aryan said, and is on augmentation of the unreal and the real, and built and unbuilt environments together and conducting an interwoven space. For instance, these renderings or illustrations are really interesting, that they are showing what the designers have thought or expecting, and all of a sudden they become in the augmented reality. But I think what is interesting most of all is that these parts can be built. Some of them might be built and some of them not. But actually, part of them, they will stay always digital as a part of the city. And this is maybe what is the most interesting part after all for us. Thanks for your attention. Thanks for all these people who had helped us and our greatest students.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for the presentation. We're gonna follow with our second speaker today, Serena. If you could share your screen and tell us about your research. Thank you.
Yeah. Hi everyone, my name is Guo. You can also call me Serena. Thank you Digital Future for having me today. A brief introduction about my background. I did my undergrad study of architecture at University of Hong Kong and came to Columbia for my Master of Architecture degree. And during my study at Columbia, I was interested in exploring the potential of how mixed reality could change our physical space. And I was also interested in how virtual space could work as a spatial tool to change how we think, behave, and relate to each other. Before I go into detail of one of my research projects, I'll quickly go through some of my other experiments. In this project, I was questioning if augmented reality could change the public and private landscape of our physical space. And how could we bring emotional connections through digital environment during this COVID-19 quarantine situation? I was using AR as a way to translate our physical features to create a sense of co-location. And how could virtual space be a tool to let us think in a different way, to foster designers' creativity, or to help with our own decision-making? So we were experimenting if our thinking process could be spatialized and people could physically interact with your own thoughts. And how could virtual space provide new perceptions for us by eliminating gravity, time, or even scale in the virtual environment? And lastly, how augmented space could foster a new kind of playful environment for designers' collaboration. I'll continue to introduce one of my research projects in detail. And in this project, we assume that in the future, everyone will have an AR glass, so we can take advantage of those digital information and change the property of our physical environment. We picked the Aubry library at Columbia since many students use it every day, but it's actually very old and its physical environment may have some shortcomings, such as the learning space is squeezed in a corner and the study space actually discourages people of sharing their ideas, and they're either too scattered or too public. However, you could imagine that this physical space would be very hard to customize. We interviewed 15 of our classmates to understand which type of learning space they prefer, and we map their preference on those 4 axes and categorize them into different types. And in summary, people actually take good value of the atmosphere other than the function of the library. And the most important thing is people are really diverse in the last spectrum, on the preference of private and public learning spaces, because people really have different comfortable range. And inspired by the finding of that people would need different public-private environment, we were thinking AR could create this kind of asymmetric information on the physical space. So even though people are sitting on the same table, the digital information will make them perceive different public-private landscape. Yeah, so this is our research question and also statement. AR could create asymmetric information and also create personalized learning experience. So we chose 4 of our specific physical settings as our test ground. For example, could a large table become smaller cubicle space? And could the scattered space be unified by digital information and create a sense of co-study? And could we transform the traditional impression of the narrow space between the bookshelves and turn that into more sharing activities? And could the hallway be more quiet when people passing by? In this example, the space between the bookshelves is super narrow, but actually have a good potential to become a very communal space for people to share their ideas. So imagine the reviews and comments of each book could be transformed into roses and growing out of those books. And this is a prototype video to give you a sense of the experience if you have AR glass. So when you walk in between the bookshelf, it's like walking in between a narrow garden. And maybe you can, for example, pick up 1 roses and read what the previous reader have commented about it and to see if you want to continue read this book. And this one is how we could take advantage of our ceiling with the help of digital information. A ceiling is actually a public platform that everyone has visual connection to. So that gives us an idea to create a rewarding system to encourage learning activity. And in this specific scenario, we were thinking how we could introduce a reward system into the library to kind of encourage the readers to spend more time in the library. So if you study more than 30 minutes, you will shoot a star to the ceiling and everyone can see that. The more people study in the library, the more stars it will appear in the ceiling and beautify the environment. So you could have a sense of companionship with the other readers. And the other idea, like the space in between the desks are usually very public and with many noise because people are all passing by. So if we overlay a natural grass on the ground and suddenly people could step lighter when they walk on the ground. So that gives a hint to people that you should take care of the other readers and to make the space more private. And this is when you sit on a big desk and maybe it's possible to turn that desk into a smaller customized cubicle space with your preferred view to block visual connection between people. And then we conducted user tests by projecting the digital information on the floor and on the wall to see people's reaction towards it. I found this really interesting that one of my friends' reaction, she actually wanted to touch it because she felt that it is a real one. So that let us think like how we could use visual cue to trigger other sensations in augmented reality. So we actually extracted the essential visual cues in life and had this hypothesis that if you can imagine an object is spiky and it may cause you to have a feeling of fear. So you might trigger runaway behavior. And similar if an object is really hairy and you might want to pat on it. So we were thinking like if we could take advantage of those visual cues to let human behaviors to be triggered naturally in mixed reality. It also echoes with the essential quality of AR, which is mostly about visual. So if designers have better understanding of those visual cues and in mixed reality, we may create different interaction that might not happen in the physical world. And we actually quickly experiment this idea in VR, in AR. And this is the demo of using visual cues in the space. And we want to test how people feel about this abstract creatures. So in summary, we're trying to use augmented reality to manipulate the degree of public and private landscape in the library space. And by designing those visual cues and overlaying them on the space, without specific human sensory reactions could be triggered and certain behaviors could be suggested. Yeah, that's all about my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I, as a student and then faculty, I spend many hours in corners of that library. So it's very exciting to see what augmented reality could potentially do when you're spending a lot of time there. Thank you.
Yeah,
so we're gonna follow this conversation about sensing and sensory stimuli with Mano's presentation. So really looking forward to seeing your presentation whenever you're ready. Thank you.
Yes. So I'm going to share my screen. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, super. So first, hello, everybody. Thank you very much for having me today. I'm really glad to be part of this panel discussion. So to shortly introduce myself, I have graduated in August from the master design, from the social design department at the Design Academy of Eindhoven in the Netherlands. And I have graduated with a virtual reality project called Yanta. But to give you a little insight of my background, I started as a sculptor in fine arts. I had a first master and I continued with this second master in design, in social design. And today I can say that my practice is as a synergy between digital and physical environments. And it's, I can say that I am myself now a sculptor of digital environments for wellness. And that's how the project Yanta is born, because it started when I went back to France for the first confinement in March. And I went back to my at my parents' place, and there I found my mom completely paralyzed by the fear of the void or the fear of being bored because she was forbidden to work, and she was like completely empty, not knowing what to do, and just doing household stuff just to pretend not doing really nothing. And she told me that she was really like not willing to do anything during the day, but when during the night she went to bed, she was dreaming a lot, and the dream space allowed her to be more herself and to have desires again and wishes. And so I realized there first the relation that she has with her work, that was completely like an addiction and really nocive in a certain way, because without that she was not my mom anymore. So I realized that she needed like another dimension, if I can say it like that, to really get rid of everything that she has in the physical space. And that's how I came up with this idea of creating an environment where you are the only one there, and that the only things to do is to be with yourself, to spend time with yourself. And as you can see on the screen right now, the only things that you can interact with is your shadow inside this world. There is no time measurements or no specific goals. you are embodying this character that I try to make it as not gender and general as I could, because I wanted that a lot of people could relate to it. But that's something that I would like to develop further in the next, for example. But yeah, the idea of this environment is really like to have the possibility of having this space only for yourself, and try to just interact and be playful, and sometimes it's a bit like hypnotic to travel there. I have to say also that it's an environment that you have to go back to. It's not a one-time experience. It's a ritual, but it really depends of the person that is using it, because you are introduced by a voice at the beginning when you start to wear the VR headset, but then there is no guidance and nothing that will direct your way. So it's really proper to you to define your own use of this environment, I would say. And maybe to talk about virtual reality and the possibilities. In my case, because I started as a sculptor, when I discovered the possibilities of VR and 3D and digital in general, I realized all the possibilities that was offering to me. You can play with gravity, but also in this case, you can really dilate everything that is around. And that's also an interesting thing, because in general, VR, it's a lot of interaction or stimulation. It's really like, entertaining, I would say. But here in Yanta, maybe sometimes there is some balls like that, but there is no specific animation. And that's what I like, that it was a real fight in the design process in my case, but at the end I'm really happy about it, because I was always putting some vegetation, some trees, some birds, some extra stuff that was not needed. And at the end I removed everything, and I just kept this landscape that I designed in a certain way that will stimulate the interaction with your shadow, but in a really subtle and simple way, with relief and the different tools that you can use in Unity. But apart from that, that's it, I would say. I don't know if I'm a bit too short, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Mo, for a very interesting presentation. I think it was not too short, actually. So next up, it's Alessio Grancini, who actually joined us for the immersive environments, let's say, panel in July this year as part of the Digital Future World event. So Alessio, if you could share the screen.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Can you see my screen? Can you guys see it? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for always Digital Future taking in consideration my work. I've been joining Digital Future as a as an instructor 1 year ago with Biana, and I met like an incredible community of people. Also, Serena was in our class. Good to see you, Serena, again. And I loved your work. I see you did like so much work. It's incredible to see how it grew so fast. I've been working in AR and VR for the last around 4 or 5 years in a way. As many of you as a student transition into more of a professional role at Morphosis architects, and today I'm just going to present like a little bit of a focus of mine that it's been in the last period that about AR filters and virtual production. I believe that AR filters are probably, if we want it or not, are probably the biggest expression of augmented reality if we think about the mainstream sphere of social media and everything that is accessible to everyone. I think is the most successful experiment of augmented reality until now. I have to say, from a personal standpoint, I believe that AR filters are great, but also as a AR researcher or anything, I like AR and VR for thinking more in a sphere of what could be helpful in the future. Why should we use it for our lives? Like what could be the best use case scenario for it? I think that the AR filters are a little bit futile as a subject, but it's probably a way in for everyone to be part of this augmented reality community, and it's a very easy way in. So I tried to put together these two different interests and try to create a way to make AR filters more relevant. Relevant is a big word to use, but maybe like use their capability for something else. And in this case, the concept of virtual production. I'm going to show a video that showcase all of my research in 3 minutes. And then after the video, I'm going to go through and try to break down the process that I went through doing this. So everything starts with my researching, doing something that like a tool that can edit in real time your video without actually going into a software like Premiere or a software like After Effects where you can actually edit your video, like splitting it and something like that. So here I call this kind of experiment I did real-time AR choreography, which basically takes some part of your song and identify some values, and when the values is above a certain level, it kind of changes the effect in your filter. So I don't know if you can listen to the audio, but you have an idea.
Can you maximize it?
Audio maximize it?
No, the video.
Sorry. Oh, sure. Sorry about the funny dance. I'm not a dancer, but I mean, right now I couldn't call anyone because of it. So this first part of the filter showcase basically two different techniques, and oh my god, I lost it. Sorry about that. Two different techniques. The first one is distancing. Is basically catching like the distance between some parts of your body, which can be a good replacement when we think in terms of pose detection. I mean, usually when we are thinking about augmented reality or virtual reality, we really collaborate with the concept of pose detection. So we have certain poses that we do, and these things are identified, and then they trigger some actions. But a good alternative to don't really identify a pose is actually identify distances between, for example, your hands, like saying if the distance between hand A and B is like more than a certain number, just do something. So that was the main part of the filter that I just showed, and then there is also another feature that identifies a peak in the song. And then when the audio peak goes, like it triggers an effect that, like looking at some social media like TikTok or Reels on Instagram, there is always like this sort of when the song drops, you do something like the edit changes or something that goes in that direction. So my research went a little bit farther and tried to play with the concept of algorithmic beat mapping. That is a research by Giant Scam, and that is like a developer that published the research on Medium. And I took his research, and basically this is what happening with this. The research, his research is, let's say, on the right window, and my contribute is on the left. So basically every time that is analyzed the song and is retrieve a certain value of the song, the cube that is in here is like changing its position. So this research that he did is basically taking what is applied in live performances when there are like a lot of shows, like music shows, and like he's bringing it into Unity and try to create like a digital environment out of this value that you're retrieving from any song. And I guess this is like the way all of this editing tools work on social media when we are using it, for example, like just thinking about TikTok. And so I was thinking really how to arrive to a point to having a sort of real-time editing without the need to go back and forth between a software, like a third-party software of the application. So here the second experiment of mine that is like changing some filters on your face when the song is like analyzing this value, and this value is passing, let's say, this threshold that there is in the middle of the video. So every time this value is touched, we're just changing the effect. So this analysis like kind of let me understood that like eventually this face filter is just an effect that we have in front of our face, and it's fine. Like it's probably the most common use case scenario that we see around. But what if we try to actually substitute some environments in this filter instead of having just like a eventually overlay of information in front of our face? What if we actually have something like more complex, so different layers back and front? So here it goes. I'm going to start to showcase through the research. I'm going to go pretty fast, but I'm going to publish this later. I'm going to make it available if you would like to read it with more time. But as I was saying, like my first precedent was seeing like dancers on social media, because what they do usually, their videos and all of their content is much more complex than actual real, like let's say normal people, because they are performing, they want to see you want to see all their body, and they are doing a lot of different moves. Most of the time the editing requires also to change camera in certain part to make it more effective. And usually, like I've seen a lot of use cases of dancers. Most of them don't stay on the platform entirely. They are actually going out and like using third parties application that actually improve the experience. So they improve the editing, and then they just like repost it on the application, and to have like a better experience. And here, like 6 of the elements that I actually analyzed are the pose detection and the square distance detection. So it's 2 ways to trigger a sort of effect. Then there is a body tracking and face tracking. There are occlusion maps. There is a speaker detection for the music and understanding the level. There is an audio detection that is instead using a pre-processed audio instead of actually getting it out of the speaker. And then there is the technique of the algorithmic bit mapping that is mapping on a song that like certain values on an interval of a song, like I showed in the video. In terms of triggers, what could be used, I was kind of mentioning before that I think that the distant like kind of retrieving distances between parts of the body is much more convenient at actually pose detecting a dancer, because like the dancer moves so fast that sometimes it's very hard to understand where is what part of the body. So maybe getting just distances between certain parts could be creating some more unpredictable and very fast effects for the filters. And another reference I included is being like Spider-Man into the Spider-Verse, because I love how this movie played with a lot of different layers of depth, and it kind of like every frame is like a composition of multiple layers, one on top of each other. And I thought that that was the main strategy I was going for if I had to work on something similar. Then here, the first filter that I just showed, and like in a nutshell, like when the song touches a certain value, the filter is switched, is changed to something else, but there is also like a distance detection here for activating some effect in the first part of the filter. So that was the main start of all of the research. This is like the filter development. For the first filter, I also took in consideration another investigation with a tool called TF Lite that allows you to have more, let's say, operability on the Unity scene, and you can customize more your AR experience. Is not really like AR Foundation. It's a little bit different. I used the Unity human body tracking in the second investigation. I modified the shader to have like a match to matching the occlusion profile with you. And then I detect the audio from the microphone of the device. And when I get a certain level, I kind of activated the filter. Yeah, so this was the main strategy, was having like a person would kind of being the occlusion model for you of your body, and you could just locate some information behind or in the front, and it would create this sort of illusion of depth. Sometimes wouldn't match perfectly, would be a little bit in delay, but it was still working pretty fine. This is the other analysis, was kind of trying to differentiate some layers in the scene. So having like, the main goal for me was having like a front layer, an occlusion layer that is you as a person, and then a background layer, to have like 3 different layers which you could put information in the front, in the back, and like let's say like a music video, when you see that is when you're fully immersed in this kind of virtual production, and you can see visual effects in real time. This was still the analysis, and for the algorithmic big mapping, the research features something called fast Fourier transformation, where a signal is converted from its original domain to another different frequency domain. So in other words, means that you're getting a lot of values out of an audio track. And it's very hard sometimes to understand what's the value that you want for activating that specific effect. So here it gives you a lot of different versatility. It gives you a lot of way to get the values that you would like to have in your filters. And once you find that kind of peak, I call it peak graphing, you can just like change your effects and just activating an effect every different time that this kind of Boolean values is detected in the experience. So this was the filter that I just showcased in the video. The final part of everything, so it was the main goal, is basically represented in this diagram here. I zoomed a little bit more. So this was mainly my effort in trying to have you at the center of a scene, that you could have a back layer and a front layer, and then there is a director that has actually a physical camera. I can just like move around and just record in real time something that is continuously changing. So without going into too deep into the technical production of it, this is like a video of it, and it applies the same concept.
Like that, your girl need a doll and that's 100. 패키중에 100내 몫을 원해. Come on, get some. 나 같지만 어쩔 순 없잖아.
So this is like interesting because like I kind of really struggle to find a way to have like two different layers of augmented reality on the front and in the back of the subject, and also have like a very kind of accurate way to track the occlusion of the subject. This is possible just in a version of IR Foundation. They kind of removed this feature, and I don't understand why, because I think it's a great feature, but I think they want to improve it more. But this is like incredibly effective, because being in the front, you actually don't need to actually to create any occlusion for the subject. So there are perfect edges here in the front layer of the content. And I thought that that was a very nice way to have like different things in the scene. Also, the scenes behind are 6 different underground metro scenes that are switching based on the song values that are here, just for a diagrammatic purpose. And we see that they are changing very quickly. So what I did in the second part was kind of delaying that change and make it more natural.
Look at you, now look at me. Look at you, now look at me. How you like that? Your girl need a doll and that's a honey. Package 중에 100내 몫을 원해. Come on, get some. 나 같지만 어쩔 순 없잖아. What's up? I'm right back.
Sometimes I run into this problem that it's actually like the subject could just move and go inside of the other object, which is probably not a pro, but like the fact is that you can switch very quickly from this scene and going maybe like to this scene where you don't have anything in the front. And it gives you a lot of like, let's say, freedom in terms of directing a video. And eventually you could add a lot of more features and make it much more dynamic. But like, this is like the main concept. And yeah, I think this is all the research. And thank you so much for letting me share my efforts, and congratulations to everyone for the other presentation I've seen so far. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alessio. Coming up next will be Jennifer Durand, Daniel Escobar, Claudia Garcia, Giovanna Pillaca, Jose Luis Vintimilla Granda, who will be presenting a joint project they completed as part of an intensive workshop with the Futurely team. So guys, please share your presentation.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Digital Futures, for having us. We're going to present our project Aquacore. So our team is composed from comes from different parts of the world. I'm Daniel Escobar, and I come from New York. I'm currently a practicing architect in New York, and I'm interested in the emerging technologies and how they work in the field of architecture.
Hi everybody, I'm Jose Luis Vintimilla. I got my master's degree in advancing architectural designing from Columbia GSAPP. I'm interested in developing an architectural language, and I have some projects on America, Europe, and Middle East.
Hi everyone, my name is Jennifer Durand. I am a practicing architect and a teacher here in Lima, Peru. I am interested in the applications of technology in architecture, and I have built projects here in Peru.
Hi, my name is Giovanna Pillaca. I'm an architect and teacher in Lima with interest in computational design and new technologies for arts and architecture.
Hello, my name is Claudia, and currently I am a student architecture at the University of Alicante, and I'm working in my final degree project, which is focused on computational design.
And we got together because we attended the Visual Entities workshop made possible by Futurely. So we want to thank the Futurely team and instructors, Mariana Kabugera, Arakesh Shan, and Bamsi Krishna. So to start with our VR project, we considered two paths. On the one hand, there was the idea of developing a mimetic architecture with reality, and on the other hand, trying to exploit the intrinsic qualities of VR, freely experiment with the tools for computational design, and bringing the architectural narrative to another level in search of an unknown experience. We opted for the second option, and this led us to work with the following question: how can narrative design influence design constraints that lead to an otherworldly experience in a virtual environment? Our design process was divided into three phases. The first one was the concept phase. In this step, we brainstormed to create the first narrative and first exploration through sketching and testing different iterations of ideas. The second one was the computational phase, where we generated the formal idea of the project. And lastly, we then revisited the narrative and adjusted it to enhance the VR experience, which was the final phase of the project. We'll start by explaining the concept phase. The project started from the idea of how water has certain cultural connotations such as purity, renovation, and calmness. We took this idea of an otherworldly museum as a conceptual tool that allowed us to explore and develop the architectural experience that resonates with our narrative. Water is one of the most important elements in order for life to happen and to be sustained. In all cultures, water has a prevalent position both in scientific and religious fields. This duality of physical and spiritual link between humans and water gives to a project the ground to explore an architecture that can account for both sides of the connection. As part of our initial collaborative virtual process, we used Miro, which is an infinite board, to communicate with the use of sketches, diagrams, and images. We took inspiration from subaquatic life, its forms, and then how they assemble organically. Consequently, we looked towards understanding how man-made objects, materials, and structures will react and change due to this aquatic environment, and how these forces can result in a new architectural structure. These are some examples of the prototypes that were developed based on the main idea, using various softwares to achieve the materiality and composition that best resonates with a narrative.
We will explain how our project moved to the computational design phase from a narrative point of view. The idea of the project evolved to create a narrative based on a fictional subaquatic entity placed in the outer space. Aquacore is an underwater entity lost in space. It attracts other planets composing its own planetary system. Nowadays, it feeds on a porous planet made of ice, being in a total state of equilibrium. This aquatic entity is a multi-layer system. The entity is created by aggregation of different organic elements. There are three main layers that compose the Aquacore entity. The outer exoskeleton maintains the right condition for each physical state of water and protects an organic body composed of three types of cells. The organic cells, made three types of clusters, is one with the ability to extract water from its three physical states and is stored in the internal cores. The internal cores provide the Aquacore entity with a state of harmony and balance that is capable to be transmitted to those who visit its interior.
To achieve this experience, some civilizations have developed a set of spaces, such as platforms, ramps, and walkways designed to generate a continuous and complete through Aquacore entity. These images show the different space types. By traversing the ramps, walkways, and platforms, the visitors experience the vaporous appearance of steam water, the fluidity of liquid water, and the crystallization of frozen water. These are the different cells, cores, and the special relationship between them.
Finally, we will explain the last phase, which includes the VR experience and all the considerations that we took into account to achieve it. This experience was reinforced thanks to the VR software Sansar, which allow us to recreate an immersive 3D space. At this point, our design for an inhabitable entity and the initially established user experience features proved to be insufficient. We needed to introduce the user to the experience of an organic aquatic environment that is also immersive. So we proceed with the exploration of movement, sounds, lighting, and dynamic textures that provoke sensations and interactions between the user and the virtual entity. Additionally, the VR software allows users to experience an interactive social environment because there can be several users connected in our entity at the same time. An important part of the immersive VR experience was the choice of the textures and their mapping, as they would be experienced in one-to-one scale. Different material maps were customized, such as albedo, roughness, normals, emissivity, and metalness. Here you can see a small part of the gallery of the colors and textures used in the project.
The movement inside Aquacore is carried out primarily by conditioned spaces such as platforms, ramps, and walkways. However, we also designed some other objects, like the elevators and the teleporters, which are interactive elements that expand the ability to travel from one specific location to another. Aside from the interactive objects made for navigation, we also design other objects which are meant to be used to enjoy experience. These are throwable objects. The VR software allows us to add some new physics dynamics to enrich the tours of the users in the entity. The gravity and navigation through Aquacore were designed in a way that the low gravity, similar to Moon's gravity, allow the user to experiment the weightlessness. The creation of elements such as drums permitted the teleportation through the different planets, which increased the sensation of inhabit an isolated planet. Our narrative and the search to try to answer the initial question led us on experimentation, resulting in the otherworldly Aquacore experience.
If you want to challenge your senses with an otherworldly experience in virtual reality, you can scan this QR code. Please do it. Now we can enjoy a video of the VR experience. In this project, we bring together the sensorial experience, mind, and body, scale, and the customization of the space. Thank you very much. Here are our Instagram accounts in case you want to follow us. I want to thank you to Digital Futures for having us. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Wonderful presentation. So we directly move to the next presentation by Liu Xue, who is an interdisciplinary artist based in Los Angeles. He's using an array of media, including video performance and photography. He's also interested in consciousness and neuroscience. And today he's presenting his project, Performance, Embodied Simulation, and AR. Please share your screen.
Okay.
Leo? Yeah, thank you.
All right, good morning, everyone. So to start, I really want to thank for the previous team for showing the videos. It's so vibrant and yet very calming at the same time. So before the presentation, I really want to thank Digital Futures for having me today, and also thank for the three moderators today for hosting this panel. And I just started with a quick introduction about myself. My name is Li Yu. I'm an artist and currently based in Los Angeles. I use an array of media, including video performance and photography, to kind of explore the performative nature of image making. I also kind of invest in consciousness study and also neuroscience, where it tends to find new perspective to think about our bodily presence and the embodiment. I also came from a architectural background and received a master's of architecture degree from Pratt Institute, where I also studied performance and fine art at the same time. So for today's presentation, I really want to start to talk about my research on the mirror neurons and also the embodied simulation in the cognitive neuroscience realm, and also how it leads me to create the AR performance 60 seconds and 24 hours. So to start, I want to introduce the mirror neurons to everyone. So in the early 1990s, Giacomo Rizzolotti and his colleagues at the University of Parma actually made a very surprising discovery. They discovered a certain group of neurons in the brain of a monkey fired not only when the monkey performed a certain action. For example, in this instance, we'll use grabbing a banana off the box. But they also discovered that when monkey watched someone performing the same action, or even when the monkey heard someone performing the same action in the other room, the same neuron in charge of the action also fires. So that is really interesting and also provide a very substantial and convincing evidence for the activation of our premotor cortex in both humans and monkeys upon observation of the actions of others. The very same neurons fire in our premotor cortex as if we're engaging in the same actions as the ones that we observe, even if we did not like execute those ideas ourselves. So I think the discovery really kind of like revolutionized the understanding of an embodied process. and also the embodied response to the observation of the action, and also confronted us to rethink about the action and intention and also object understanding. So here, when we'll talk about the action and intention understanding. So when we see this picture of a person that firmly grasped the banana, so first of all, when we see this image, we'll make sense, oh, this is a movement, a person trying to grab this banana, but also we were able to understand the intention behind this movement. So the research on the human MNS has shown that the observation of a still picture, for example, this, a hand firmly grasping a banana, also activates the same motor representation of grasping in the observer's brain, even though we're not performing the same action and we're not observing the action live. So this kind of like suggests that mirror neurons not only underpins the action understanding, but also involved in understanding the intention that underlines those actions. And it also seems like too correlated with not very specific movements, but with very specific goals. Here we will move on to the object understanding. So here we will see a very beautiful stock image of a banana itself. So when we see this image, we will think about, we can actually grab this one, just like the person did in the previous slide. And the image, the observation of some graspable object can also lead to the simulation of the motor act that the object afford. This really implies the same neurons not only codes the execution of the motor acts, but also responds to visual features that triggers the certain actions, even when we don't see the movement present. And also the simulations occurs in response to the experience of architectural forms. So in this instance, we will see Lucille Fontana's painting. So viewers often experience a sense of bodily involvement with the movement that are implied by physical traits. So here we will see he actually cut the canvas. So when we observe this image, actually the similar neurons in our brain in charge of cutting the action also fires. So I think for me, that the discovery of mirror neurons and the research related to object understanding and intention understanding and also marks understanding suggests that the performance of the bodily processes are actually much more actively involved in the cultivation of the mind experience than we could ever imagine. So as an artist, I was thinking about why not use performance as a art form and try to expand our understanding of what performance means outside of the conscious thought or intentionality. And here I also used AR technology to help me expand more dimensions by adding the interaction with the virtual object into the performance as well. So here we want to show the performance, 60 seconds and 24 hours. So 60 seconds and 24 hours is a performance of the ongoing action of two performers and geometries inside their phones. The work considers the embodied simulation in reality and virtual space between the performers and the geometries. So the performers was given brief introduction on how to interact with these phantom geometries, and they can enter and switch different scenes by touching the red cubes through their phones. And here we have 4 separate screens that shows the performers' view through the phone, the movement of the geometry, the performance through the spectator's perspective, and also an overlay of the performance and the phantom geometries. So the name of the performance, 60 seconds, 24 hours, is really trying to suggest that this performance can take place in any location and any time. It just spread across locations and time. The performance of the mirror neurons in the brain of the body and the performance of the body that mirror neurons enact kind of like forces us to rethinking about the performance as a embodied process, a process of body not only communicating with itself, others, but also with those phantom geometries that we see through our phones and live in the same space as us. So here we will see the phantom geometries are kind of like this restless mediators between the bodily presence of the 2 performers and also the mediators between the reality and the virtual space, revealing the ways in which action, object understanding, and learning can change the interpersonal and spatial experience during the performance. Furthermore, it can like become a semi-autonomous aspect of a lived experience for the performers as much as for the viewers. So the performance is not really concerned with making sense of, what type of choreography sequence we're trying to execute in here, but instead, sense is made when the performers correctly perform the mapped actions within the phones, and also through the firing of their own mirror neurons and the subsequent performance of the bodies. And in that sense, the performance is extended far after the face-to-face encounter into this very mercury realm of the chemical pathways and electric impulses of the brain and the body. And these are the text diagrams. I call it text diagrams of the performance. So you will see here the performance given brief introduction of like how to behave and how to interact with a certain kind of objects in their phones. But other than that, and also that's how we developed this AR app is also based on this text diagram. So thank you everyone for the opportunity for me to show my research and my work. And before I finish this presentation, I also wanted to point out that this performance was finished in the early 2018. And because the research of the consciousness study and neuroscience is also constantly evolving. And actually, in the late 2017, there's another theory called the spread mind theory, which is also really interesting, and I want to share a little bit here. So basically, this is the person, he thinks all experience is perception, and all perceptions is physical object. Experience is not experience of something, it's just that thing itself. So that's a very interesting and also a radical ideas that kind of like rejects the idea of the neurons fires, and also we perceive the stimuli and the body act in a certain way. But he tends to think the body and the physical object and even the environment as one. So I would also love to hear more about what you guys think of the body and mind connections. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Leo. It's really interesting to see your explorations on perception and consciousness. I think there will be some questions. I would now move on to the last presentation by Sean McCallum, architectural designer, creative technologist, and co-founder of mixed reality architecture studio iheartblob. He has received his Bachelor of Architecture with distinction from the University of Dundee in Scotland, before studying at the SciArc in Los Angeles and the Eindhoven University of Applied Arts in Vienna. Sean has taught several workshops on augmented reality and virtual reality through experimental workflows, and today he's presenting Read Write, Mixed Reality Urbanism, and we are looking forward to see his project. Sean, please go on.
I couldn't unmute myself there for some reason.
No problem.
Okay, can you see the presentation in full screen now?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, perfect. So, yeah, thanks a lot for having me. I'm Sean McCallum. Like Sina said, I'm a co-founder of iheartblob, and we're a mixed reality architecture studio with the focus on how we can use augmented reality, virtual reality, and a combination of both through extended realities as a way to engage with architectural problems. So today I'm going to be presenting Read Write, which is my own research out with iheartblob, and it focuses on how architecture might be read and written through augmented or mixed reality interfaces. So like any good architectural lecture, I'm going to start off with a computer-related term. So Read Write, albeit the name of the project and the method in which I'm looking at my own work. It's a term in computing which means we're able to read the data and therein write/overwrite data to it. For example, when you save an image on your computer or your mobile device, you've managed to read the data to the disk, and once you view it, you're essentially completing both of these tasks. You're reading and writing the data. And on another level, there's protected objects, essentially, which may be labeled as read-only, which, as the name explains, removes the writing component. You're not able to actually overwrite that data. So even though the term might seem unfamiliar, I'm sure we've all went through these steps of reading and writing data in some form, but it's mostly contained to the screen. So if data rarely leaves the screen in this kind of situation as reading and writing, then perhaps architecture as a spatial device is read-only, though I would completely disagree. So architecture has a reputation of having an unwavering concreteness. It's strong, stable, provides shelter, and we've all had a professor which stands astutely by these views on architecture, that this is what architecture is. But what if we considered architecture as read and write? So it's the ability to do both. So if we did the whole process of how we define architecture, and the city will change entirely. So architecture goes from being a static block to a dynamic spatial experience, and our cities can go from anonymous bleak extrusions to personalized urbanisms. So to consider architecture as read-write, as that capability of both reading and writing to architecture, as architects often do, I chose a site which had to fill a certain criteria. It needed to be large enough that it's almost a whole city. It had to be complex enough that I could get lost in it, and many, many other people can get lost in it. But it also had to be repetitive enough to track. And lastly, it needed to be physical. It needed to be a physical space that people would understand and know. So what came to mind essentially was the Barbican estate, and this fit the criteria to the best of it, or best of my thinking anyway. Its modernist representation was perfect for the technical aspects of the AR where we're at today. Its large piazzas are often overlooked and kind of underused, so they're perfect for large-scale augmented interventions. And the Barbican staff are known to hide their passes in fear of being asked where something is, because they simply don't know. And it's mostly just because this whole site is huge, and it's really a confusing space to visit and inhabit. Yeah, so in order to help people move through space and to create new spatial experiences, we needed to know, okay, so how do people actually move within the city, and get a better understanding of the pain points within the Barbican, which can be better understood and adjusted through this mixed reality interface that I'm thinking of. So like I've mentioned, the Barbican estate's often underutilized, and you find people lost in the space and feel kind of, and also quite a lot of the spaces feel kind of desolate. They're quite empty. And the goal would be to basically enliven these spaces through this interaction or new spatial experiences. So to better evaluate what you're seeing on your screen right now is I built like a real-time simulation of agents which move through the space, each having their own specific goals. Like on a quite a simple level, they're searching for a cube, they're generating the shortest path, and then essentially when they complete a goal, they start to generate new agents, and it starts to get incredibly congested, and then we have to kind of rethink what the spatial conditions are and how do people move through these spaces. So imagine it's incredibly enlivened space, then how do we deal with so many people in these spaces? So one thing to note about this is these agents know exactly where they're going. Like as soon as they know what the goal is, it's this cube in an arbitrary part of the site, then they know how to get there. They're able to calculate essentially the shortest path to get there without, but for humans, we kind of move around the city without any kind of knowledge like this other than through a technological aid. So Google Maps, you could also use architectural landmarks, I guess, and the other option would be a paper map. But what if we could use the urbanism as a way to react and configure movement for us? So although the initial simulations were looked at kind of this top-down view of the perspective, the goal was obviously to flip it and start to look at from an agent's point of view. So start to see what the agent sees in the space, try to understand how or how these kind of visual connections start to build up as someone moves through the space, and get a better understanding of the viewpoints of people, essentially. Okay, so what we've been looking at so far is the reading aspect of the city. We've not done any writing to the city. We've not done any kind of adaptation. This is important for us to know, but what we need to consider is what if we could write to that. So from carrying on from this perspective of the human being, we take the Barbican estate as a given. So it's an object that exists, it's there, and we can start to write towards it. So you can start to take these interventions, whether it's something quite playful on the left here that you can see that's almost like a puzzle where parts click together, or here where you're starting to just play with like these very simple extrusions that can kind of signify a direction or a movement. And then you can take the Bjarke Ingels-esque twist and form a direction in that way. Or lastly, you can look at how similar, I guess, to what Alessio was talking about with distance-based reconfiguration. So from a distance, we can actually reconfigure the architecture. And this is what's happening on the right. So as you approach it, the architecture kind of reconfigures, it comes into place. So for me, I'm looking into this idea of a personalized urbanism. And for it to be personal, it must feel as if we have agency within the city. So what I mean by that is when I do something, when I move forward, the city must respond. Or when I have a specific goal in mind, the city also has to react to me. And what you can see here in this video is essentially as I move forward and back, the city essentially animates, parts move together, they start to create new spaces. And what was interesting for me was that at this point, I started to look at the inhabitant of a city, not solely as an inhabitant, but more as a player, very similarly to like a video game. And then we can start to think, okay, what kind of interactions can I actually do within the city? How can I influence the city, and vice versa? Can the city influence me to move in a more effective way, or can I use the architecture as a way to delineate some sort of wayfinding within a very complex space? And then carrying on from this first person point of view and the kind of role of the player, it was apparent that at the Barbican estate, we needed multiple strategies across multiple scales. So from this architectural viewpoint, you can see on the left, we needed to generate reactive spatial conditions. And these were directly influenced by Kevin Lynch and his 5 elements within the city. So he kind of outlined, if we have the city as only a read environment, we can essentially identify these 5 elements that we can use as a way to move through a space and kind of understand it without the use essentially of Google Maps. It's a kind of an old idea, but interesting nonetheless, I would say. And you can see in the second image, this is kind of more the urban interventions that I'm talking about with this kind of Lynch idea. And then thirdly, because we're using the Barbican estate as a given, we need to kind of define a collection of parts and how these parts are going to be defined and utilized within creating these new spatial conditions or new experiences as you move in a sequence through the space. And these are just defined by a series of kind of Booleans and subtraction operations. So when our cities are able to be read and written, there are endless possibilities for personalized reactive urbanisms alongside shared urbanisms, which we haven't even started to consider at this point. So this is, I guess, not the only possibility. And to summarize, like read-write questions what's possible and reflects on a personalized urbanism with the world as a given, where we don't need to go out and design and build new, completely unsustainable architecture, but rather we can reconfigure the cities that we currently inhabit and the ones that currently exist, and we can engender new experiences and have essentially a better architectural experience within space. So I'm going to leave you now with a short video on essentially how I put all of these components together within the Barbican estate and kind of my own viewpoint on a personalized urbanism. And that's me. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful projects and work, Sean. Thank you very much. So to open up the panel, we would like to sort of compare and put these projects next to each other. I think it is really interesting and striking to see that with let's say similar interests, we see different approaches, right? We have had 7 projects, and if I want to somehow start with the first project and maybe put it next to the project presented by the Futurely team, I see that there is an interest obviously in using these technologies and sort of integrate them into the workflow of design thinking and designing. And at the same time, for instance, when I look at the work of Liu and somehow also Manon from Eindhoven Design Academy of Eindhoven, there is also an interest on the way we can use these technologies for better perception, and also to a certain extent, even as a tool for therapy and a new way of basically being conscious about our presence in the space. And also, when I look at the work presented by Alessio or the work done in GSAPP Colombia, I see that there is also an interest on the way we can sort of use these mediums to basically define the way we interact with the space, interact with the users, so on and so forth. So it is really somehow interesting to see these, let's say, differences and somehow reflect on that. And lastly, I would like to also mention how basically we can sort of address the technical aspects and use them as a way of basically researching in research and integrate them in the workflow of design and basically perception of the space. So with this, I would like to open up the discussion to the panelists and presentations, and maybe Biana wants to add. Biana and Claudia wants to also add some points before we get into the technicalities, and maybe with this 3 aspects. 1, representation, the way these new technologies can help us to represent differently. 2nd, simulation, like the way, for instance, we see in the work of Sean, how a new, let's say, level of resolution and a new workflow can be introduced into the simulation. And 3rd, perception, like the way we saw in the work of Liu or Manon to a certain extent. So with that, I would pass on to maybe Biana and Claudia to also add some points, and then we open up the questions which we have received from the audience.
Yeah, if I could add anything, there are obviously certain elements that are inherent when you're working in this media, such as let's say a sense of embodiment, which we see a variation of that throughout the project. So I think in Manon's work, the fact that actually the shadow of one becomes quite dominant and it provides sense of scale, it's quite fascinating. So embodiment is definitely something that is, in a sense, a very big part of also our perception of space, how we also navigate. So that's an important criteria for us to consider. And also, it's quite striking that most of us here do come from architectural backgrounds. So the shift from architectural representation to a first-person view, right? Or in this case, let's say in Sean's work, or let's say in Alessio's work, or in Samim and Aryan's work, the point of view becomes quite interesting. So the shift from for us from isometric, let's say, perspective use to first person is quite important, right? And then how then ties into issues of perception and again embodiment as well. And then especially in Sean's work, since we ended with that, it's very difficult not to draw a comparison to the work of Zigaberto Man with the Movie Camera, right? So the movie, which in a lot of media study and cinema is fundamental of how we think about, let's say, documenting our urban environment, and the idea of a kino eye or the person observing the environment is quite important. Again, it goes back to embodiment and perception. So these are things that it's quite important to put forward, and I think we saw variation of that throughout the projects. And at the same time, some of you more than others, you are looking at data as this other layer that could basically inform already existing workflows in AR and VR. And I think Claudio would have more to say on that, especially when it comes to type of data that you are overlaying. Thanks.
So I think, first of all, congratulations to all of the presenters. Very interesting and let's say a lot of different paths that have been explored. I think that's really cool, and I think that's really important to have this kind of, in the same time, overlay of ideas and concepts, but in the same time, this kind of difference in interpretation and implementation of these ideas. And I think this is one of the benefits of this kind of, let's say, discussions, that you can see ideas align, implementations align, technical side and conceptual side also, but also this kind of, let's say, plenitude of potential exploration spaces. So I do believe that in this sense, we are actually in the infancy of this exploration stage. We are kind of founding or putting the basis of what's possible to come when the technology will be more, let's say, widely adopted and more powerful in terms of let's say, the hardware and the software capacities. However, as it was the case with gaming, where most of the concepts have been invented the same, or the moment that the dot was able to move on a screen, and very soon after, I think we're also experiencing and seeing that, right? We're seeing ourselves at the first, let's say, time that we can actually ask ourselves what happens emotionally when we go in this kind of either virtual or augmented space. What happens technological? What are the challenges that we need to answer to be able to provide such spaces? And I do believe that this is a very, very, let's say, exciting time to be alive. Also, we have to touch the context that we're in now, right? So we have this kind of disconnection happening because of the current, let's say, health crisis. And I do believe that the topic of VR, AR will be, because of that, maybe partially, but also because of how architects or what our architects are looking for become more relevant, right? We are going to spend more and more time in virtual spaces. We already do it in a more or less, let's say, still disconnected way via our mobile phones, and we're I'm referring to for example, Andy's Clark extended body idea of that we are already extending ourselves as cyborgs through the mobile phones and tablets. I think we're now actually starting to move past that. We are moving either into fully virtual environments, or let's say this kind of augmentation of environments where our, let's say, needs transform, right? I do believe that that's the experiential aspect, what kind of experience we're looking for are the driving forces that are actually going to push design in a, I would say, not necessarily completely novel, but in a very interesting space, right? We will be facing empathic questions that we never asked before. I really liked the project that actually touched on that, right? There was quite some, actually most of the projects did touch on that, but they did it in such different ways that it was actually beautiful to see how that question was answered in a more abstract, a more, let's say, personal and very soft way, or it was more, let's say, approach via physical simulation, so in a more hard, gravitational, still tectonic ways. I'm also personally interested in this debate, what is the importance of tectonics and what is the importance of space that people recognize when they actually go into a world where they don't necessarily have to obey the physical constraints. So how can our emotions guide us and help us build this kind of outerly worlds so that they don't always go crazy. That's also an interesting topic that I think we should touch about, this kind of craziness and freedom that comes with the VR and AR experiences. A lot of, let's say, formal explorations and a lot of, let's say, explosive worlds of colors and soft materials and so forth. I think all of these are really cool topics to touch upon. I would probably, we should probably move to the questions first to answer some of the questions that have been asked. And then we can, of course, dive into any kind of, let's say, debate around these main ideas that were also Sinai listed at the beginning of this, let's say, part of the presentation or of the debate. So, Biana or Sina?
Yeah, so we do have quite a few questions about your technical workflows. So people are curious in terms of sometimes polygon count, all the way up to specific tools and techniques. So I was wondering if each of you could talk about your general workflow in terms of not only the platforms that you use, but ultimately some of the maybe interoperability that has become maybe part of your process. I think that would benefit people that are viewing this session. Thank you.
Is it more of an open question or?
Yeah, so for instance, I think, so Alessio, you talked about your paper, and it was quite evident, let's say you use Unity platform, but I was wondering if you could talk about also asset production. So if you could talk about maybe a general sense of workflow and perhaps also what got you to this point, because you also had a very interesting journey with this platform. Thanks.
Okay, maybe I can start and then anyone absolutely can add to the discussion. I think that for many of the people that are joining this panel and they are presenting this panel, the background in design gives you the ability to touch on a lot of different things. And in my specific case, I've been getting very close to Unity, because Unity, in my opinion, is a program that allows you to have like a three-dimensional understanding of space and also programming at the same moment. So I believe it's like a win-win from someone like us. I have to say more advanced in the work, more I have to say I'm starting to take in consideration other things outside of the environment of Unity. But it's definitely, in my opinion, the main structure that you need as a designer that wants to get into interactive experiences. But right now, the future is on the web, so it's going to be much more free and much less like structured to like attached to a software, and that's it. Like I was believing to become very expert in Unity, but then in a lot of projects that I've been joining recently, I've seen that Unity, it's actually not the one that they're using, or like something that is required that I never seen before. But I think every time it's the same process. You go through, you learn what you have to do, and then it's just more of a building up from there. Regarding the more of a, let's say, reflection for architecture in the world of gaming environments, I believe that, like, recalling a little what Sean said, we need to get in the mindset of a dynamic environment, like a complete dynamic environment which has no, let's say, constraint, and everything can change in any moment. And we need to be capable of handling a continuous update of what we're doing. This is actually entering in the industry of architecture and engineering, even like not caring about speculations. Like if we just think about Revit, like what Autodesk is doing now, it's really like the way that things are going. There are platforms that keeps you like updating stuff continuously. And I think when I started architecture school, I think the mindset was completely different. It was more like, we're done with our project and that's the project. And right now it's really more of a continuous, like a continuous workflow that is really never ending, but you need to structure in a way to maintain it in the future. I think that's maybe a main reflection maybe anyone cannot do.
Maybe I can add a little bit to that. I think it's super interesting that you brought up the futures web, because like over the last, I guess, 4 or 5 months or something like that, I've kind of moved away from Unity as well, and I've been building like web AR experiences for mostly for the fact that it's so accessible. So I guess the other kind of really accessible part of AR that you touched on earlier as well is the social side of it. Like pretty much everybody has Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat installed on their phones. So the accessibility of that versus downloading like a 200 megabyte app or a 1 gigabyte app is crazy. But I think web takes that to a whole nother level, because it allows people that don't want to use these types of platforms, whether it's a privacy issue or simply they just don't use it. It kind of opens up doors for that as well. And I think one of the other nice things about web, there's a lot of nice, I guess, scripting platforms that you can utilize, like 3GS, that has like a really nice rendering system for actually 3D geometry online. And you can actually build web XR experiences in 3GS as well, which is really, really nice. Like I just recently bought an Oculus Quest, and like I downloaded a couple of games, but then like as soon as I realized that there was all these other free games essentially on the web that I could just put in a URL and then I'm in an environment, is completely game changing, I think, because then we can basically produce these spaces for free and make them far more accessible than having to purchase something like a fully fledged game.
I feel like for me, I could definitely relate it to like the more accessible AR or VR less softwares nowadays. I feel like the performance I did is also in Unity, that is in 2018. But for today, we actually see Instagram has their own called Spark AR Studio, and also I believe Snapchat has called Snapchat Lens. So it's also everything become like very accessible. You can starting to import any geometries you modeled to the software, and it already has so many different templates that will like trace your motions and your face. And also it opens up a really interesting question about kind of like the performance in the digital age, which we kind of like perform a different identities on the social media. So that is also really interesting to think about the like how the identity and the social media. And also, I also want to share, I think for me, what's really interesting or like what's really important for my practice is also this mind and body connection. And my research on the mirror neurons is also kind of like suggests that actually the body, like our physical body has like a more important role than we ever think about, because there's this kind of separation between the mind and the body. And we often think about our mind usually embodies this like very intellectual ideas, but I feel like for me, the physical aspect or the movement is actually also a hardwired psychological truth. And so I think in my practice, I definitely really really pay attention to the movement and to, I guess, the gesture production, and also the interpersonal experiences. And also, I want to add that is we are also, I think the neuroscience on the performance or the dance is also in a very beginning age, and also we're also in a beginning age of the AR and VR. I think there's definitely a lot of potential for us to explore.
I maybe just wanted to add something about this kind of, let's say, moving away from game engines and so forth. I think there is definitely a tendency to make the technologies more available in terms of making them web-based and so forth. I do believe that there is also this risk of going into this kind of trap in which you can actually limit yourself through selecting a system that is only able to do this and that. Or in some cases, that may be very interesting to explore, but also find the limits of those systems, right? So people are mentioning the Instagram environments and moving away. I do believe that there is still a lot of value to actually bring this kind of game engine technology into the main stage. I do believe that this kind of remote rendering option and the 5G, let's say, affordability will make possible to actually get more or less the best of the two worlds, right? So hyper-realistic graphics, complex computational physical simulation systems on the one end by using the game engines, either Unity or Unreal or whatever you prefer using. And then again, bringing that into a more, let's say, interfaceable or more a better user experience for the users, that they don't have to install, they don't have to do, they just have to open a link or whatever, and they will have that full experience. I'm also talking about if you want to go a little bit more serious in this field. So if you actually want to add brain computing interfacing and so forth, probably the game engines or this kind of systems that are kind of a backbone that you can add different modules are still the best way to go for. So this is more or less something for those watching and asking about what's best to do. Well, I do advise in my experience to actually explore all of this kind of ready-made solutions that are making your life easier. I also would like to just raise this point that you may be missing out on a lot of, let's say, potentially interesting features. So I wouldn't yet call let's say the death of game engines in the VR and AR world. I think actually they are the driving forces, and they'll always be the first to adopt the new technologies and so forth, while they will probably get much better at making it more accessible and more user-friendly, both for developers and for the users, right? So I think that's an important point to make, because otherwise we risk going into a narrow corner of technological limitations and just make some very pretty simple, let's say, AR experiences, whereas we could actually explore a much wider solution space. I'm curious to see other.
I just wanted to add, like, I mean, with my first critique, I didn't mean to go in that direction. Game engines are, we are.
I understand. I'm just saying that that's a point that I think is valid to make, because otherwise people are just getting on board on this track. So moving so fast away from it, maybe.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think that, like, if I have to give my standpoint on that side, I think that as designer, we should make our own softwares, for example. I think that's what we should do, actually, because we are always subjected to third parties, and we are cut out from everywhere. Honestly, we are always like very passive. So if I need to take it in that account, like, I would go in that direction. I'm saying that the environment is so wide and so spread right now that, like, you need to be capable of switching between a lot of different things. That was more what I wanted to communicate. Yeah.
The only point was that probably tools like game engines can be the catalyst platforms that can actually help you connect all of these, let's say, tools that you may want to do, and also accelerate the idea of developing your own tool set. You don't have to maybe reinvent everything from scratch. You find this kind of combination of let's say, for example, in-game tools, assets, outside tools that you can actually connect. And then you create this kind of easily and rapidly. You can prototype your own ideas, your own software, if you want, solutions in a much faster way than just going full low level by yourself. So again, that's also this kind of danger of trying to go too low level when you actually shouldn't go. You should just find the right way to combine parts and make your experiments prototype faster, because as you've seen, most of the work today was actually based on Unity, or almost entirely, which says something about the flexibility of the system and how easy it is to actually get something in VR and AR. Again, I'm not limiting to Unity. I'm just saying that that's the gaming engine role is going to be pivotal still, and even more maybe in the future. Okay, that was the whole point.
But maybe, sorry, to move forward and ask others to still talk about their workflows. But it seems like it comes down to asking a question, maybe in the beginning, who are you designing this for? And we saw that in Serena's work. She spent some time talking about user study, and we know that with this let's say, way of approaching design, user study and playtesting becomes quite an important aspect of this, right? In order to then determine pretty much what level of access one needs to provide, and then based on that, determine the complexity and robustness of the tools that would require for that. So I was wondering if, Serena, you could continue talking about your workflow and then that experience of user study, and then everybody else could also chime in on that. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. That was actually my first experience of user-centered design approach, because normally when we do architecture design, we always start from probably like site investigation or a broad social concept, but it seems like there's less opportunity for us to start from the real users itself. So in that project, we started by observing, like in a site, we started by like 24 hours observing, and then we kind of notice what is the problem of the space. So from that, we kind of reflect on what affordance that AR could provide. So starting from user and starting from the media itself, we kind of arrive in the middle, like how could this kind of new digital tool could help users to have better experience in space. And the general flow is basically like user interview, user observation, and then our own provocation. And then we put our provocation in front of the users again, so to have their feedback. And then we develop our design, and then we sort of prototype that on the real selecting the image on the space, and then invite the users to physically like test it. So basically the design is actually all driven by interaction with the users. And finally, we arrive at a different track of design. Like instead of mimicking the real world, we decided to create another conceptual framework. It's all because of like one observation from the user that she actually don't think the virtual environment should like mimic the real world, but it should like deviate from like the really detailed object to a more conceptual like track. So actually all the decisions in that process has like influence from the users.
I don't know if Samim and Aryan, if you want to follow up, you had a very interesting workflow between Unity and Rhino. So if you can elaborate on that, because I think that pretty much summarizes quite a lot of, let's say, popular tools that are currently being used. So what was the thinking behind that? And in a sense, if you could also reflect on your own technical workflow, that'd be great.
Yes. Maybe Aryan, you start, and then I would give Gogo
sure.
for purposes that he had done.
Yeah, sure. So what we exactly did was that use an open source platform. It's called Speckle, and modified it a bit. So we could make a collaboration system between Rhino, between CAD programs, and then with another modification, we use that for Unity. I heard you said that someone asked about the triangle numbers and something like that. And that was actually a big problem for us, since we couldn't actually transfer the data in real time so fast. And what we did was that we used this JSON compiler. So we had the geometries in Unity, and to loop them back in Rhino, we actually used a local hotspot string. So we sent the string, the location properties through an UDP string to the Rhino, and recompiled it to two vectors for rotation and location, and we repositioned in each frame. So we had the live data again. And The second question I forgot. I see.
It was generally about your technical workflow, or
Yeah.
if you had any comment about a democratization of maybe even tools, which was something that was brought up earlier. Yeah.
I think that's the most reason that we have done it was to connecting the different platforms, because the whole experience was aimed for the teaching experience, and that was like conducted in the studio. And since softwares like Grasshopper, Rhino are now like basics in the architectural schools, was like a great opportunity to bring the different engines on top of them and to bring the students for the collaboration. But I think that I see it also as well as Claudio had mentioned it. I mean, using the ready-made has always the danger that we are staying in the black box and not going further behind the opportunities that they're giving us. But other way around, I see also the advantages of, for instance, Unity and the whole community behind it. Because as long as we are going for the educational purposes, this whole community behind it can make it possible that everyone getting more involved and trying to experience and getting in some level of conducting their ideas in the virtual reality and augmented reality. But maybe, for instance, one really serious thing that we had faced was how we are going to publish our applications by not paying the giant platforms and the devil governors of the digital world, like Apple Store and then Google and so on and further. And I think that what Claudio also mentioned, and it totally confirmed, is that web browser would be also an interesting idea. But for us, connecting different tools and different softwares was just only an experiment on the educational purposes.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Maybe I would like to move on with this idea of game and gamification, because in most of the work, this idea of like designing a playground for perception, for representation, for exploration is very important. Like we see in for instance, in the work of Serena, there is even a system which you mentioned. There is a rewarding system, right? So there is a way to sort of reward the users and sort of give new agency to both designer, but also to the user of this system that you sort of create. So I wonder, maybe in your work, and somehow maybe to a certain extent in the work of Manon, how do you see the role of gamification? How do you see this new agency that we have as designers, but also as a user of these spaces that we create? So obviously in your case, in the case of Serena or Manon, it's very much about this one-to-one interaction. But in the cases that we've seen at the architectural design scales, this gamification becomes more like a kind of a mastermind behind the whole system that we create in order to explore the three-dimensional space. So maybe first I would like to hear your idea, Serena, and then maybe Manon. How do you see this new agency that the designer and also the user has in these game-based environments?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. I think for everyone, like to involve something like playful, it's kind of a human intuition that you kind of want to play the game because it has like a playful or encouragement element in that, so that it motivates you to continue with that experience. Yeah, I think in terms of the space, like these kind of motivation could like inspire you to as you said, like there's like one-to-one interaction in the space. If there's no like responding from the system, perhaps there's not really much difference from like what we're living in the real world, that everything is static. So you kind of live in that space by yourself, and all your activities actually shaped by this static environment. But if there's a gamification or interactive elements from the system, you sort of feel like interacting with the environment, and it kind of motivates you to like have better or different behaviors than in the space itself. So I think that kind of like is essential for users or for the designers to create that agency to sort of in between the user and the space, to have another layer to motivate people to either interact with the system itself or have changed their behaviors for the better.
So maybe I would also like to hear from Manon,
Yeah.
because you also introduce yourself as an artist, and then how do you see the role of gamification in your work? And in general, I would like to know what would be the next step for you. What is the next thing that you're interested in?
Yes, thank you for the question. Yeah, maybe also to come back a bit on the way that because I come from a more designer background than architecture. And in my case, also like because time-wise, I had to do it in a really short time, and I don't have any skills about programming or coding. So and that's where I think, yeah, Samin were pointing a good thing about Unity is that it's creating this whole community and this whole exchanges. And I had the chance to collaborate with a programmer. So my role in the design part of this landscape was really like to design the experience. And as I was a bit explaining during my presentation, is that it was a fight for me to try to not design too much or to create too many interaction or stimulation, because I try to give a lot of agency to the user. And maybe to conclude, I think that in the next step, for example, the first things that I would like to change is that you, as the user, in the first time, you create your own avatar. So you have your own digital body and not this basic and general character that I have at the moment. That would be a first thing. And then, yeah, I think that it's about making some details and maybe develop even more the light effects that you can have with the shadow, and perceiving that sense in going into a more and more immersive and personal experience. And also I'm using and I choose Oculus Quest because of that, because of the fact that it's wireless and that you can really merge within the device and really like feel the physical body, but also the digital shadow that you have there, and you are free in your movement. And if you are playing in room scale, then you have another perception. And maybe we need to come back on what we were saying at the beginning. What Alessio brought is that we need to maybe push a bit further the way that we design the devices at the moment and make them adapted for a different kind of experience and not have one model of headset and have different variation.
If I may, actually moving on from actually what was discussed here, I would like to maybe open up a discussion about the role of the designer in terms of this kind of experiences, where I think we are shifting now from, for example, in Sean's example, but even in the work that was done in the Futurely workshop, I think we are actually at a point where we can create some kind of, let's say, basis algorithmic computational basis for a more participatory design spaces, right? So in the spaces, everybody was trying to create something that was responsive to the users, either emotions, perceptions, and so forth, right? So in the way, what we did and what was done, what is today done for many of the projects was that they were empowering the users to interact with the space by creating some kind of means, some kind of, let's say, procedural or generative, or in some cases predefined algorithmical options that they could then employ, and then let the user more or less make use of that. So my question for the whole let's say group would be, what do you think is the future of this? How much do we have to step back from designing a full end experience, even if we think it as a gamification experience, like a game, right? And how much of a step back we need to do, and what is our future role in that? How can we create systems that will enable participatory design with an empower users to become more in control of their environments and also respond to their goals and emotions? Because I think that's one really important aspect to address from a technological or even experiential point of view.
If Claudia, Jose, Danielle, Giovanna, and Jennifer, if you guys are interested in commenting on the experience of using a multi-player platform to be able to manage an experience, that would be great. And then this way we could go back to conversation that Alessio and Sean were.
Yeah, well, virtual reality for me is the art of tricking the brain. And I think in our project, we made that really well because we created an experience that allowed the users to let their imagination like fly. And I tested the project with the VR headsets on with the HTC Vive. And as soon as we entered to the project, we have this very light gravity, very low gravity. And when you enter and you experience that, your body reacts as when you go after a roller coaster and you have this stomach like feeling, and all that when you're in your living room, because I was in my living room with the VR headsets on. And I think that we create an experience that allow us to explore a universe with new rules. For example, with the drones, we have this type of seating spaces that were not as foreseen as in the real world. You can teleport with these seating spaces within the project or to another planet. And I think that part of that was about the techniques that we use. That was, we use sound as an immersive technique, because when you are with the headsets on and with the headphones black, you can erase yourself from the real world. So you're truly like in the line in between the real and the virtual world. So by being deprived of these sensations, the brain starts believing what you're seeing. It's like, and for me and for us, that was the whole experience in our project. We were making the testings in Durand, because at the beginning with the first steps and with the first prototypes, we were making the testings and seeing if what we were trying to do can be experienced in this VR software that is Sansar. And at least that was the whole experience for us for developing a VR environment. But I think that in the future, well, we're in a very like in the starting point of this, because these technologies can have a lot to offer, at least now that we are in pandemic times. And at least for me, when we were in pandemics, I was like trying to go to the beach or some places with the headphones, with the headsets on, because it was like a way to escape from being isolated in your house. So I think that maybe that's the future role of the architect, not only making the real architecture that you can build, but also making this type of new environment that the person and the new users can feel and can have like sensations, because we have different types of approaches like lighting, movement, sounds. I don't know if everyone else in my group want to add on that.
Yeah, I would like to add maybe for us it was a bit working from a workshop. Our tool from different softwares was a bit more guided, So we ended up using the software we use Sansar as a VR tool. It was a decision for the instructors. And I think it was like a great opportunity to start with the VR experience, because no one, at least of the team, the members of the team, had that experience constructing or building worlds in VR. So being able to use a web engine to do this instead of Unity or Unreal, that are a bit more technical, give us the opportunity to make maybe a bit more completed work in less time, because the experience with this web browser is a bit, I think, light to learn that with other software packages that are also more maybe more expensive for the computer. The web system is like more adjustable to the kind of computer you may have. And the most important part in our workshop was to learn different softwares and how they work, and the strategies you can develop to connect those different softwares. So for us, the main goal, or the main focus, was to get the geometry in the VR software, and we developed like a pipeline, some kind, to get to that point. So even we were creating complex geometry with other software, like digital sculpting software, or parametric software like Grasshopper or something like that. We needed to get them in all unite in the VR. So it was like learning how to do that interoperability between the softwares, and then work towards that that focus, that objective. And we think that because of our workshop, the final project benefits from the things and the softwares and the strategies we learned in the software, in the workshop. So if anyone of my team can add something more.
Otherwise, we can move on to a question. So Gustavo has a question here. How do we as researchers envision a new spatial paradigm? What are we missing? What technologies are on the horizon? Is this about economy or ideology or curiosity? So I know that, let's say, in this team project, you talked about maybe rethinking gravity in this space, right? Since you are in control of the physics of the world that you're creating, perhaps playing with that. So I was wondering if anybody else could comment on perhaps rethinking spatial paradigms through the use of this technology, and how that could then potentially inform what we're doing, maybe in more mixed reality form.
Maybe I can touch on that a little bit, and maybe from the question before as well. I think there's something really nice about using like a multitude of different platforms, and I think this is one of the things that's been introduced more thoroughly, I guess, into architecture as we start to look at game environments or gaming engines, because they basically come with a baseline, and then you start to build upon that. So you start to add plugins, you add new modules, you connect with different scripting platforms and things like this. And I think that's one of the things that as architects is super exciting, because maybe to connect with what Alessio was saying about architects building their own tools, it gives you that flexibility and that freedom to do that, and also to kind of connect with these other devices. But it's nice to use these traditional architectural tools within game engines, but I think there's a lot of value in looking at it from the other perspective, where if we are given a game engine, there's completely different rule sets that architects are not used to in any way whatsoever. And I think that's incredibly exciting for architects to not try and impose traditional architectural software onto Unity, but rather to think about how can I use Unity or Unreal in the way that a game designer would, and actually learn from that, which I think is incredibly exciting, because you're learning something new from someone else essentially through the software. And I think that's an interesting, I guess, an interesting point to think about for architecture, and how we start to also, I guess, design our own softwares.
I guess just to touch up what Sean says, there is to be a sort of differentiation between what kind of impact we want to make as designer with these platforms. I believe it's kind of hard to generalize too much when we say, for example, I see some questions that say how we design with the new technologies or something like that. I believe like these tools give us the capability of building new things, new infrastructure, and I see the advantages of having anything that is more like collaborative and multiplayer oriented rather than just like a standalone application. Because I've been involved in a lot of different research and articles recently that really featured this idea of spatial computing, real world index. These are concepts that like big tech companies are including in their panel presentations, and they really talk about how we can organize an urban condition in the future, which I thought it was a job of an urbanism committee, but like eventually the impact of these figures is becoming lower and lower because the technology is being captained by tech companies. So I think we should find a way in and find a way to collaborate with this new media and being relevant in the environment. Because if we really want to keep ourselves relevant in the discussion as designers, we should be really able to comprehend these new systems that are happening now. And I don't know if anyone here saw the Facebook Connect presentation some 1 month ago, but like that was pretty harsh the way they talked about the future and the plans that they have. Like it was pretty strong what they said, and I thought that it was real. There were a lot of relation with architecture, with all of the things that we did. For example, what Sean showed about read and write, or even just Serena's project about this kind of library overlay. All of the systems are eventually going to be embedded in a unique platform. And this could be a pro, but could also be a cons, because it really leads everyone just to use one thing, and it leaves you really with no other choice. So I believe right now we are in that kind of transition, and I wonder if anyone, any thoughts regarding that, if anyone thought about it, or if anyone has a personal take on it.
Yeah, I think what digital media has excited me is that it provides us with a chance to get rid of all the physical constraints, including but not limited to gravity and maybe time and distance and location and scale. So it gives us a chance to create like pure experience. But like for physical architect, maybe we have to consider like the construction, like the structure, and also material, things like that. But with digital information, it could become a pure like experience, like maybe can never be achieved like in the physical space.
Okay, so we have one great question that we want to address from actually another Digital Futures youngster, Marina Rodriguez Neves. She's asking, so if we think of immersive environments as liberation from square screen frames and designs based on grids, I was wondering, how do you think we will liberate ourselves from designs normalized by our perception based on the traditional perspective, because it seems that we haven't gotten over it yet. And what I would like to add here is perhaps we can tie this back together to the question of representation and our training as designers. Alessio, we had when we had our immersive environments talk a couple of months ago, we had one representative from Unity Reflect, and also you showed the work that you're doing with Morphosis. In this case, let's say creating AR and VR environments that would allow us to, let's say, cut sections through buildings, right? So in a sense, although we were looking at, let's say, this technology, and we were able to change scale like never before and have a maybe different sense of materiality, but again, we were talking about a traditional way of looking at a 3D space, right? So in this case, through section, through elevation, etc. And this is also quite important, since we know that, let's say, platforms like Revit, they have quite a substantial number of AR and VR plugins that are being created, right? So I think this is a great question to address, which is, again, how do you think we will liberate ourselves from designs normalized by our perception based on the traditional perspective? So I was wondering if you want to comment on that. And again, it goes back to the previous question about maybe possibility of thinking about new spatial paradigms. Thanks.
I think I'm mute. Can you hear me? Okay. I would like to post like an article I've been reading some days ago in the comments too, that I think helps to understand what I'm saying. I'm actually building a new article based that starts from this one. I think that generally it's a little bit of a general question, like what is really a traditional way to design? It's not really clear. Like what is for you traditional might be for me not traditional. So it's really hard to like design is such a free practice, which it's quite difficult to describe the traditional way to design. Like Morphosis is a very precise way to design that created a legacy for the last 40 years. This is not the way that the Gensler is designing. This is not the way that Mies designed. And I think that the freedom in design is also the beauty of the practice and what makes us so attracted to the practice and what we're doing. But generally, I think that from my standpoint, always, what is actually impacting a lot the field and what the clients want more, it's the presence of data when you are presenting a project. They want to have values that are reliable. They want to know before to do something that something is going to work. And I think that's a very natural instinct that probably any one of us, if it does a very big investment, they would just like to know if this thing is going to work out or not before ahead of time. And fortunately, like I think AR and VR gives us a lot of opportunities for representing that in a very immersive way for let the client be more aware of the situation. Some clients are, I have to say from my experience working at Morphosis for 2 years, some clients are not really comfortable in using these technologies too. That feels like weird to say, but like there is also the fact that a lot of clients are used to see deliverables that are not really in line with what we are talking about. So you need to do a step back and really thinking about your user, which is an approach that I saw in Serena's research a little bit more. Like we really need to think about people first when we're talking about design. Then if we're doing research, that's a totally different matter. But like trying to comment what you say about representation, Diana, I believe that deliverables are highly changing, like much more animation required than actually boards and models because of the COVID situation, because of many other things. But animation is reaching a level in architecture that is becoming cinematic. So it's becoming like Hollywood productions, and just reaching that level of Hollywood production animation, which doesn't even involve any AR VR technology, is pretty challenging for an architecture firm, I have to say, because you did your education on something else. And you find yourself to have a choice, that is the one about sourcing, or investing energies and time in trying to creating a team capable of doing something like that. That is a little bit what Big did in the past years with the Netflix documentaries and all of these things that really hyped up the concept of architecture for everyone, make it more accessible, which I think is the right way to go in that case. So definitely, I believe a new window into the architecture is becoming animation much more, but animation not as a fly through the project, animation as an experience, like animation as a movie, like as a guide me through the project as if it was built. It looks like it's done, and it's an experience that, I don't know, something like Framestore might be doing. You know, like this big Hollywood production. So that's something that I think, if I need to reply one-to-one to the question, that would be the way to answer. So maybe digital media. Yeah. Yeah, you can jump in.
Yeah, thank you, Alicia. I think the fact that how this is used in industry is definitely interesting point to address. But maybe if we want to go back to this to the core aspect of this question, which address this idea of us seeing the world through the lens of perspective. When I see for instance, the work of Leo, where we are constantly changing our point of view. I mean, in that case, as a dancer, and then we are sort of seeing some objects coming through us. So we are constantly changing our point of view. And the way this is somehow make a difference in the way we see the space and then perceive the space is fundamentally different than the way we usually start drawing a perspective and then turn that into a building. So I wonder how this is sort of changing the way we, first of all, perceive the space, but also design with this ability to constantly change our point of view and then navigate the space and perceive the space and potentially create the space differently. Maybe Leo or somehow also maybe Samim can pick up on this, and anyone else, how we can benefit from this multi-directionality of the space and the way we perceive the space. Leo, you want to jump in?
Yeah, sure. So when we think about how we can liberate ourselves from the design normalized by the perception based on a traditional perspective, for me, the movement or the performance is definitely the answer. So I think in this case, the designer takes into like a more active role as a performer. So it's kind of like designer, but also with the view of the user. And I started this I guess study for this for the performance by kind of like developing my dance gestures. So there will be like a serious study for me in one space just to dance like every day for 30 minutes, just 1 hour, to kind of like develop my language, like my personal movement and language. And then I started to like add more dimension into it by adding like the virtual objects and learning, and also see how the discovery of the mirror neurons help us provide a new perspectives into like learning to understanding the object, but also the space. So I definitely think the movement, the performance is the answer here. And for us to take a more active role.
I would like to add to that. So that's one very interesting way of looking at this. I think one other problem that we're facing when we're trying to move away from a perspective or try to make a perspective shift is that we're emotionally involved with the space. We're emotionally involved with objects. We're emotionally involved with shapes. So the point is, how can we change that, or how can we find an abstractization or abstraction of that love that we have or preference we have, while still keeping the relevant aspects, right? Because we are used to seeing a space, we're used to seeing objects, right? And we do have a relation with those objects, right? And we're used to that one way or several ways of looking at things. So the moment you're trying to see, okay, combining, or let's say we lose gravity, we lose form, we lose details, right? What is the essence of the thing that we can still call a relation to the space, an empathic relation to the space? I think this is another way, which kind of connects with what Leo said, because the performance, the experience is still this kind of emotional, empathic relation to space, right? You're not seeing the space just purely from your memory or from your, I don't know, your previous connections with it, but you still have to keep some kind of relevance of that emotional connection so that the space is still relevant. You still want to find shelter, whatever the shelter of space means, or whatever functional, empathic, whatever ideas that space is creating in your mind, is evoking in your mind, right? So even if the space goes very abstract and goes completely away from what you're used to, you still have to somehow find the base values of the core values, or you can also maybe look into finding new let's say relevant aspects of space which have not been explored so far yet, right? Because we're kind of used to static spaces, right? So one of the main advantages that the VR, and especially the VR environments, give is that the space no longer needs to be static. It can shift and it can change colors, forms, lights in real time. And you even can anticipate your emotions. You can try to create states, or you could potentially imagine a space that is folding and molding around your interest or your emotions, and not only seen as a one person, but also in conjunction to maybe in a social interaction, right? So what is a space that kind of morphs around you when you're meeting your loved one, or you're in a more, let's say, ample context? And how can those spaces, for example, help us now in these times to maybe feel more connected? So I think this is also another way to look at empathic spaces as also a potential solution to that question of how to break away with the patterns and norms of what is being more or less familiar space, I would call it, right? Or for familiar experiences.
It seems that we are in a kind of a continuous roller coaster in a way. And it also reminds me of the work of this painter, Dutch painter, Escher, which is very much about this multi-dimensional, multi-directional perspectives. Yeah. So, I don't know, Biana, do you think we
So I was wondering if anybody else wants to comment on this. Otherwise, we could close the session, as it's I feel like we could continue this 10 times as 10 more hours. It's a very new territory to explore. Questions are quite vast. Yeah. Okay, so maybe just to conclude, and maybe going back to what was just discussed, and also what Alessio mentioned in terms of architecture firms beginning to ask for maybe animations as a way of production and delivery, and going back to also one thing that I think it was kind of the elephant in the room, but I think at this point it's given. So when Manon was sharing her screen earlier, she said that, well, the resolution is what you capture from VR, and we know like the difficulty of actually capturing something that is very difficult to capture if you're not wearing the headset, right? So this problem of documentation of these spaces, where with the headset, with the right environment, with the, let's say, right headphones, etc., it's quite magical. But then once we need to take it away from that, and then let's say in the format of presentation, it becomes quite difficult to communicate. And it goes back to the comment about perhaps architecture representation moving away more towards video making, which is the issue between in this case, more narrative-based approaches versus open world approaches, right? Which is a topic on its own. So I was wondering if anybody, for people that are viewing this, perhaps they're interested in taking on some of these workflows, if you could talk about that relationship of creating these experiences that are kind of endless in terms of what you could walk through and see. And this was something that we, throughout the Futurely workshop with the spaces that you had, it was quite important, right? So these are light environments that anybody could join and experience versus the difficulty one faces with documentation. Even though maybe the spaces that you are creating are open world, but then when you need to package it a certain way, you do actually have to superimpose a narrative over it, which is not the same as actually creating an experience that's from the beginning is narrative based. So I think in Sean's work, because the way that the city was perceived, and let's say the bar beacon was in a sense revealed in multi different way, I think that was something that I'll be curious to hear maybe a quick feedback on that. So the process of documenting this levels of complexity, as well as Samim and Aryan's documentation of the city. So if you could talk about the struggle or possibilities there, and then that could be one way that we could wrap up the session with the documentation, or how do you, once you're done, what happens to the life afterwards? Thanks.
Maybe who's?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, you want to start? You go first.
Go first, please.
Yeah. Okay. I'll go first then. I'll keep it short for you, Samim. I guess from my point of view, I found myself in a similar situation to what Alessio was talking about, with kind of trying to create this kind of cinematic experience. The AR itself, like my goal essentially as part of this research was to be able to go there with a phone, point, shoot, have the AR experience there as a single experience. But the difficulty with actually trying to document that is you end up limiting yourself in terms of the polygon count for things like that on your phone, but also the resolution in terms of what you can actually perceive. You also deal with a lot of difficulty in terms of occlusion and things like this as well. But I think one thing that's super exciting for these types of new models of representation is that this experience, if it is as smooth as we expect AR to become within the city, whether that's through a mobile device or a headset or built-in retina, whatever, these experiences should be fully spatial. We shouldn't have to flatten the experience. And I think that's one thing that's difficult at the moment, where people don't have, I guess, either access to the specific hardware that you need, or don't have a familiarity with how VR or AR works to begin with. And I think the more that we progress towards, I guess, normalizing these types of technologies, the more we progress and normalize these types of representation. And then we don't have to purely flatten, and we're not looking just for cinematic experiences on a video, but rather looking for cinematic experiences when I visit a space. Like if I was a client, when I visit the site, and I think that's where it's going. And for me, I guess it was, how could I, obviously we can't have that exact experience on the site. So what I was trying to do was I guess, flatten it as best I can without losing all the qualities that I wanted to keep within something that's entirely spatial.
I think that this is a great question, because that also meets the point of how we are going to documenting the results of the research, and then making an interpretation and making it ready for the next generation. What I'm thinking about, I just think about that the way that the architect Mike Otto started to recording everything with one single camera in this time, and that was super analog way of getting the feedback of something which is physical and materialized in the physical world. And And I think that maybe in our generation or in the field that we are going to research, and with more and more involvement with the digital tools such as smartphones now as a daily object in our life, this documentation would get also accelerated. And I think that what is really interesting and we have thought about as well is to tracking data just only as a feedback for how these experiments are working, not in the way that we are going to track a perception of the user or the audience of what has been exhibited, which is, I think, extremely complex task, but also as minimum amount of the data that can start this documentation. But what I do really wonder about is that what I've saw in the works of the Liu was this interaction. I think that was more conducted with the neural system, and maybe it's more possibilities to controlling this action and interaction. That was the question for me. Is it possible in your procedures?
I would like maybe before we move to something else to bring one topic that I think was maybe very little or not at all mentioned today about the implication that artificial intelligence is going to have in this field, and how all of these new technologies, because we talk about like state of the art in VR and AR, but also we have to consider the potential applications of artificial intelligence in this field, coming from very simple, let's say, shape recognition, object recognition, things that can already trigger AR and VR experiences, and moving to actually world building, right? So we can actually create the spaces based on what artificial neural networks can already provide us with, right? So I think this is a very interesting topic to actually touch, because it somehow answers the question about how can we detach ourselves from this, let's say, paradigm that is forcing us to go back to the way of our human way of doing stuff. So maybe one answer is to delegate that to other systems that are not as human as we are used to be, although they should be in contact to something that is human, our emotions, our perceptions, and so forth. And another thing is the influence that AI is going to have in the technology itself, how we can make it faster, more smarter, more accessible, so that we don't have to worry that much about, let's say, the technological implications of developing an experience. So I think this is something maybe that the topic for a completely different discussion, because it's a wide topic to have. But I think this is something really relevant for everyone to keep in mind, that we may not have to solve this problem alone in a way, right? So we can actually use AI to kind of help us grasp some of this kind of unknown space that we're trying to find, or horizon that we're trying to explore. Okay.
Can I add something about that? I think that one of the constraints of these technologies maybe is the accessibility, because at least with the VR software, you need to have the headsets, you need to have all the, well, machinery and everything for your PC needs to be like a very good PC and everything like that. But with AR, as I saw in the other presentations, it's more easy because it's on your cell phone and you can carry everywhere. But I think that I hope that in the future, these technologies, the VR is going to be more massive. So the experiences and all the environments that we are creating in this world that we presented here, and different environments that we created, are going to be more livable. Like the people can understand more about the technology, because I think that now is like a very, like in baby steps, at least in architecture, because here we use like the VR, but more for seeing like how this building that is going to be constructed is going to look like, and not like how to create a different experience based in VR. And I think that that's one point maybe to add about the representation, because maybe it's so difficult for us to represent and to try to narrate how the whole experience in VR is, because it's difficult to like, okay, when we record, we need like a green screen and everything. So it's more like difficult for a other person to understand maybe, and you need to live it. And I think that one is one constraint, at least for me.
I would like to point out that today, if we are not designers or anyone, the paradox is that VR is more accessible than AR, economically speaking wise, today. Because if you think about our phones and the technology included in our phone right now, with the like a phone is usually $1,000, so $600, and the Oculus Quest 2 is $300. So I believe accessibility is a great problem for sure, like to address, but it's also the way we think about this technology and how it can be implemented and why it should be taken into consideration.
So guys, we have reached almost the 3-hour mark, which is probably a record.
It's a record.
Record. So I would like to start by, or actually end by thanking everyone involved in this. Very nice presentations, very interesting discussions. I would like to thank, of course, Biana and Sina for their, let's say, collaboration and keeping the discussion alive. And I think it was a very, very good talk, covering a lot of different ideas, different fronts. Again, congratulations to everyone. And I think there is in the future some place for an additional session, like a part 2 of this, because it seems to be like a very, very rewarding field to talk about. And I think it's, again, a pressing matter to the world now, because we are experiencing this kind of detachment, physical detachment. So yeah, probably it will become more and more relevant for us. So once again, thank you all for participating and for the nice inputs and presentations, and hope to see you soon in a new session. And I think every week there's a new session, so please join the channel, the Digital Future Young, and see exactly what's going on and what's going to be very interesting topics around and everything connected to digital and computational design. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you, everyone.
Have a good day. Bye.
Bye.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.